The following video contains spoilers on the main story of Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail. If you haven't finished Dawntrail, but you do care, don't watch this video. If you don't care, then I don't care either. All of the footage of the various trials I have stolen will be linked in the description. Enjoy the video. I am hopeful for Dawntrail. I will always enjoy the story. Well, I mean, I wasn't 100% wrong. Hey everybody, Hedge here. Internet's busiest Sonic nerd. Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail is here, and oh boy, do I have opinions on that. And honestly, I don't know where to begin. Like, after Endwalker's patch content, with both gameplay and story being a fucking constant stream of discourse for the last 2 to 3 years, I was kind of down with a lower stakes summer vacation. Finally exploring that fancy dancy new world we've been hearing murmurs about since 2.0. And like, I'm a human. I knew there'd always be discourse, but man, am I tired of having labels stuck onto me for disliking certain character. Singular. But let me start from the top. I honestly don't know how I want to progress this video. But now that Arcadian's first tier is out, and all the story we could have is here for 7.0, except for whatever comic book or manga we come up with for the Arcadian Savage, like, let's start with the hot topic issue here. One that's driving a wedge between Weenie Hut Jr., Super Weenie Hut Jr., and a femboy Hooters. And obviously, I'm part of Weenie Hut Jr., let's not lie here. The combat, while jobs are pretty much the same as their Endwalker variants, which is in itself a problem if you're like me. There'll be a video on that some other time. The content itself has gotten a facelift in Dawntrail, and I could not be happier. Big ol' issue that was going in the game since Shadowbringers, but really took off in Endwalker, was just how brain dead the game's casual content was becoming. Dungeons, while admittedly have pretty much just been hallways since the Aromaborn patch content, had been becoming more and more boring. This wasn't helped by the fact that as the game went on for the next 10 years, they made less and less dungeons. Ultimately with Shadowbringers being the first expansion where no extra dungeons were made except for the ones in the MSQ. Now, this in itself is not that big of an issue. We got content like a surprise extreme or an extra 24-man in the game's first 48-man Savage in place of these dungeons, but combined with the increased wait between patch times, this now meant that Expert Roulette would have the same dungeons in it for months, whether they were enjoyable or not. Compared to A Realm Reborn, where every patch, Expert got 3 new dungeons, you're now stuck with a specific dungeon in the roulette for give or take 8 months, as they don't remove a dungeon from Expert unless a new one can take its place. Example given, patch 6.0 will have 3 dungeons in Expert Roulette. Patch 6.1 adds a new one, and the first Expert dungeon is removed. Patch 6.2 and the second oldest dungeon will be removed, rinse and repeat until X.5. This personally for me came to a head in the wait between 6.5 and 7.0. October 3rd, 2023 introduced the final dungeon of Endwalker, the Lunar Subterrane, and replaced 6.3's dungeon Lapis Manalis from the expert pool, meaning for the next 268 days of potential roulettes, I had a chance at either a decent dungeon in Lunar Subterrane that at least had the benefit of being new, or the absolute snooze fest that was the Aether Font. 268 days of potential experts with 2 box standard dungeons that didn't do anything interesting. Now, you could say, why would you do 268 days of roulettes? Just play something else if it annoys you. And that, my friend, was a reason why 14's casual battle content was so fucking boring. It wasn't engaging, it wasn't even entertaining after the initial new shine wore off of it. It got to the point even the developers found it boring, with Yoshida himself stating in interviews that the devs playing the game were falling asleep while doing this content. Another great example of this bad style of content in Endwalker was the optional side content of the 24-man raids. In the 3rd tier, Thalia, where after a decent first and second boss, we're met with 2 of the worst bosses in the game if you ask me. Oshan spends the first 40% of his fight doing the exact same AoE, a cone that goes to a specific corner. Only when Oshan hits 60% does he introduce a second cone. Ultimately, the fight swaps to a big ol' wall boss with typical knockbacks and slow cast AoEs that a 6-year-old should be able to dodge. The final boss to this 10-year-long epic, this 1.0 and 2.0 introduced concept to lore, proceeds to repeat a single mechanic of each of the previous 12 bosses with a brand new single mechanic, which is another slow cast AoE, but this time it's 3 in 1. Oh, we're cooking now, baby, yeah! So, what the hell am I talking about? I thought this was a Dawntrail video. Don't worry, I'm making a point. I'm cooking. I'm at the gas stove, you know, I'm cooking up veggies right now. I'm making up a mean stir fry. Dawntrail took a brave step towards fixing this problem by having the casual content, like story dungeons, trials, instead of being 3 to 4 minute slogs of the same 3 mechanics, to, well, kind of doing the same, still, but instead of 10 to 20 seconds for cast bars or the boss just standing there, the bosses are now constantly doing something. Mechanics overlap and require maybe more than a single brain cell to properly dodge them. Don't get me wrong, these mechanics are really not at all different from what we've seen over the years, but they're done faster and in quicker succession, meaning that instead of just waiting on a boss, you're actively, you know, playing the game instead of pushing the same 3 buttons in your 2-minute rotation. And with me right here, I have a great example. Here are the final bosses of the level 95 dungeon and the level 85 dungeon.
No circles. Knock back into no zones. Background no's.
See what I mean? The markers might be different, but ultimately the same mechanics happen. Vanaspati just has much more downtime when you're free to do damage while the boss recovers from the last AoE it did, like some geriatric old man who just drank too much. I had a run of the level 100 main story dungeon where the healer and tank couldn't keep up with what was essentially shapes on the first boss, calling it savage and too hard, when in reality the boss has 3 mechanics, all of which are marked and you've done them before in the 99 levels it took you to get here. I'm not calling anybody out, I am just saying maybe you should reconsider what is hard if you find this hard. Don't even get me started on the raid series and how some people are whining it's too hard. Like, I could go on and on about that, but I think I've honestly yapped enough about the combat already. Like, I can hear you in your mind going, oh my god, can this dude just shut up about combat already? Get to what I want to hear about. And, you know, I'll get there. But my point being, casual content hasn't gotten harder, just more interesting, and all it takes to interact with is not looking at your second monitor or your phone or grabbing your dick, I don't know what you do. Haha! Got you! Made you watch 8 minutes of this whole ass video to hear me talk about the story. I have gotten you so badly. You have never been this gotten in your life. Anyway, the story. The story. What a story of all time. I'm gonna be part of the hot take crew and say, I enjoyed it. I know, massive hot takes on this channel only. I don't think either half was better than the other. A lot of people will say, oh, before 95 the story sucks, or after 95 I hate the story. But between you and me, I think both sides are fucking stupid. I enjoyed the first half being a summer vacation treasure hunt. I have issues with the stakes and the progression of the plot, but I still enjoyed the initial idea. And I enjoy the heel turn into more shard bullshit, because let's face it, shards and shard threats are now the name of the game. And when you think about it, Dawntrail is very much like A Realm Reborn, and sadly, it takes on some of A Realm Reborn's problems, American voice acting being one of them. Like, I'm sorry, how are we going from actual British actors to random nobodies who get directed like shit? And no, I don't care that the American side can have good voices, it's not what they presented, this is how they ship the game, and this is how you should judge it. It doesn't matter if a person is the best voice actor in the world, if what they're doing is a bad job. It should be called out as a bad job. I don't care about their demo reels, I care about what I'm presented. But, to be completely fair, even the UK side sounds awful. The few lines that characters like Y'shtola got were weirdly static, and pretty much everybody all around sounded like they were not all recording in the same studio, let alone the same city. Wuklamot, who is the main character for the story, is the biggest victim of this, as she has objectively the most voiced lines in the entire expansion, even more so than other characters like her in previous expansions, and I'm looking at Lise. And boy, is is there a lot of Wooklamot. Like, a lot of Wooklamot. Like, fucking leave me alone for 5 minutes, please, Wooklamot. When Wook was introduced in the final 30 minutes of Endwalker, I was okay with her. She seemed like the little sister type who was way in over her head, and I was there for that. And throughout the first half, I still felt that way. I enjoyed her bumbling and stumbling and was enjoying the backseat we were taking. It's after the first half that my issues started. Now, a lot of people will call this
world building
and say I don't like to read, but that might be one of the worst buzzwords that people have hooked onto in this entire game. I have never seen anybody use
world building
this much as an excuse for any other expansion. We literally have another picking up animal shit quest that people screamed at Stormblood for, yet nobody uses
world building
as an excuse for that one. Again, I enjoyed the first half. I liked learning about the cultures and yada yada the same way I liked learning about Dravania, or the Far East, or Girabania, or Thavnir, or the First, or Ilsabar. But with that said, I fucking hate Genki girl characters. And for those of you who don't know what that means, Genki girls are female character archetypes in Japanese media where their entire personality is to be upbeat, usually combined with some deep-seated trauma or insecurities. A decent example of this in Final Fantasy is Yuffie from Final Fantasy VII. Her entire shtick is to be upbeat. Yes, she has a character arc later on that reveals why she puts on this bravado, but it doesn't change the fact I want to turn off the game if I have to hear her make her fucking whooshing noises one more time while playing Rebirth.
So what do you say? Wanna join up? I'm dead serious, you know. I really think you'd like my route. Could bring the whole gang even. We'll start our own Spec Ops unit. The Yuffie Recon Patrol! Shinra will be afraid to even speak our name. They'll stand in awe of the fair ninja who leads her loyal minions, and tremble in fear when they see the wire peas coming in hot. People will be banging down the door to buy our film rights. Your stunned silence says more than words ever could. I knew you'd be on board.
Please shut up.
Wook is the same. She's upbeat. Nothing gets her down. She's always positive, but she has her goofy side that she won't reveal because she is so stubborn, XD. But with her own insecurities about her father and her relationship to him and her siblings. And this is fine for the first half, where they want you to see her as a stumbling baby that's having a character arc. It's in the second half, where she's now supposed to have completed her character arc, and is now the leader of 2 entire continents, alongside her brother, and yet after this first half of, wow, I can't believe Papa introduced this concept, he is so amazing, I hope I can do the same kind of job as my Papa and protect the peace and everybody's happiness, I wasn't enjoying it for the second half. I wasn't enjoying running around after her and talking to NPCs for her while the plot was happening. The story has pacing issues like every other expansion, screeching the plot once again to a halt to go jerk off dolphins or something quirky like that. But it's the fact that after the level 99 trial, we're literally told by NPCs to go take a break, only for us to be interrupted by Wooklamot to go talk to her brother about what happened in the hour you were gone. The content you just did, not as a voice cutscene, but as a follow along through the city with dialogue boxes, very fucking slowly. Another example of the focus on hearing Wook repeating the same thing is right after the plot ramps up in the second half and a giant Thunderdome appears. We're immediately thrown into another cutscene where Wook speaks to her subjects about an hour or two after the previous one. It's obvious I don't like these character archetypes, but I want to emphasize that I couldn't care less whether or not I'm the main character. Ultimately, the plot still happens because you, the Warrior of Light, is there, which is an issue I want to talk about later. I don't care if we take a backseat, are the main focus, or are there as a background character. If the story is enjoyable, that is fine. And a lot of the story is fine. It's just a shame that the person I've heard most in this expansion and is given the most fucking screen time was somebody who after the 20 to 30 hour mark I couldn't stand anymore. Yaps a lot aside, I want to talk to you about coincidences and the awful writing of this happens because it has to happen. Let's take a small trip right back down memory lane. You know, like full on Mr. Coffee, like the Warrior of Light got involved with the Dragon Song War as early as patch 2.4, being introduced to the heretics, fighting Shiva, ultimately defending Ishgard from Vishap, and were given shelter in Ishgard after fleeing from Ul'dah due to the whole Satana sleep deal. We see the devastation and the problems caused by Nidhogg and Thorin's rule over Ishgard. We got involved in the liberation of Elamigo and subsequently Doma because we were quite literally forced into it due to Ilberd and summoning Shinru. There was no way around it anymore, and we were desperately needed by the Eorzean Alliance. Shadowbringers and Endwalker, we both directly have a personal stake in, or in case of Shadowbringers, it happens to protect our very existence. Ultimately, objectively on a meta level, every expansion doesn't have us conveniently in an area to deal with something. Here's the process of events in Dawntrail. We, an unknown to the populace of that entire continent, are conveniently picked to help Wuk-Lamat become the leader of the continent due to our knowing one of her friends, Erenville. It's thanks to us, the Warrior of Light, that the only objectively two good candidates for the leader of those continents are groomed into the leaders they have to be, which is what leads to one of the bad guys throwing a bitch fit and lets him gain power by letting a shard invade the source. We then start dealing with this problem, which conveniently we already have a history of dealing with the reflections. It is here where we manage to stop a robot bent on killing every reflection to fuel the data of her alive and dead subjects, who just so happen to use a gizmo that conveniently belongs to the same person we were 12,000 years ago. Like, do you see what I'm saying here? Imagine if instead of Shadowbringers being about specifically stopping the 8th Calamity and saving the world, and in particular saving the Warrior of Light, we just went to the first because of no specific reason, and that's when Hades decided to start fucking with shit and we were the ones to stop it. Or we just conveniently started going further into Coerthas and Dravania and stopped Nidhogg because we caught him stepping on Ishgardians while in the churning mists. You can say that on a meta level, every expansion happens because, well, it has to happen. But every previous expansion happened because it had reasons for happening. We weren't just there. Let's pretend for a second here we weren't invited to Taral or refused to help Wook. Wook would have never made it past the alpacas in the first right. Or, worst case, Bakul Jaja killed her after she stupidly got kidnapped. Kawana, Bakul Jaja, Zoralja, and Wook wouldn't have gotten past the rite of succession, and even if any of them did, Galul Jaja, as they were, wouldn't have given up his throne. Neither Wook or Kawana would have been groomed into what they were when we were there with the Scions and not become Dawn Servants. From here on, we can assume either Zoralja never found the City of Gold or found the key, so Sphene could have done nothing. Or he did, and Taral is now dealing with a shard invasion without us being there, having Sphene be free to start killing shards in the source. The entire plot boiled down to, and because the Warrior of Light arrived in Taral, shit has started going down. And this culminates in the final trial, in what I would argue is one of the worst final trial phase transitions in the game. It's like the developers completely gave up halfway through just to give you some ham-fisted victorious moment. Let's compare Queen Eternal to Hades, Endsinger, and for good measure, the last time we had a lesbian drop into a trial to help her girlfriend, Eden number 8. Hades. We fight him, and ultimately in his desperation starts using pure darkness to get rid of you. He starts casting a spell and then change you for an active time maneuver. You literally use the corruptive light that was killing you literal minutes ago to fight back against his primordial darkness and stand a final chance. Endsinger. We're fighting her, and ultimately in her desperation, she starts throwing goddamn planets at you. You use the very thing she's currently empowered by to stop a giant planet from smashing you. To which she starts going, no, 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 you're supposed to die now. And the only reason you're saved by this literal despair monster is by the shared faith and hope in you by your companions, literally using her own powers against her. Eden 8. We fight Sheen, and while we're fighting Sheen, she is starting to lose control throughout the entire fight. And before we can deal the final blow, she loses control and freezes the entire arena. She's starting to cast a literal flood of light. The Gaia comes in and manages to break us free, removes some of the ice from Rain, and then helps slow down the flood of light with her activity powers. Literal darkness versus light, giving us enough time to knock Rain out. Queen Eternal. The first phase is really interesting. She throws us around shards and does some really cool, new, interesting stuff. She has a kitchen sink attack, which basically means she throws everything at us. It's a little scary, but it's nothing you haven't seen before. The fight continues on, and then she does it again. The background starts kind of glitching, and it's like, oh, she's losing control. She removes all limiters, and once again does a kitchen sink attack. But instead of it playing out, or a cast bar to stop you from doing anything, or something to show you that you are currently on the back foot, the game screams, no, that's enough, and you're stunned. Then somehow, instead of Graha and Kryle who were there with you, fucking Wook Lamont shows up with some of the worst English voice acting yet, and then we just get unstunned. It's genuinely awful. You see what I mean? The previous 3 cases of these, and I didn't even mention stuff like Seed of Sacrifice where the face transition is peak as well, nothing in the Queen Eternal fight actually has you struggling. The phase 1 is super fun, it's enjoyable, very enjoyable even. But then, instead of the boss like forcing you into gay baby jail like your friends, or starting one final attack with alarms blaring and an imminent attack that we can't just LB3 through, the very same mechanic you live through just minutes before happens again. It doesn't even finish before the game stuns you. I completely understand that the story had to have Wook Lamont in the trial. My issue stems with how she's facilitated in the trial. Nothing was going wrong. We could have beat the boss with or without her help, or even any of the Scions. But because this is quote-unquote her story, she had to be forced in there with the devs attempting to recapture that same hype feeling as any of the above-mentioned fights. And it falls short. And it's not like they had to make it this shit. Why wasn't the face transition, instead of just an enough from the boss, a section where we get teleported to wherever our companions are, and it becomes a small DPS race to rescue Kryle, Graha, and Wook Lamont from their interdimensional gay baby jails? Or at the very least, why don't we use the Stone of Azem to teleport Wook into the battlefield or something? There is about a million ways they could have made that section more satisfying, but instead of doing that, the fight gets interrupted just to facilitate a cutscene for a character you may or may not like, with English voice acting that was awfully directed. It's like they forgot and near release needed to quickly slap that cutscene in phase 2 in there. And this isn't an issue of, oh, you just don't like not being the main character, because again, I couldn't care less. I didn't get upset about Gaia jumping into Eden 8 with the power of darkness because it felt a million times more earned. But I digress, I can only whine about that section for so long. All in all, the story, while again, can't stress this enough, and I hope you understand, I enjoyed it a lot. It felt like a self-insert Wattpad fanfiction about Wook Lamont. And then the Warrior of Light was in trouble, so I, the third promise, came in and helped out, and then everybody was so proud of me. I went home to my brother, shout out Koana XD, and we ruled together as the Dawn Servants. I just don't think an overly positive character like Wook Lamont makes for an interesting protagonist in a story, especially one where historically characters went through the goddamn ringer to get where they are. Wook starts off as a naive but positive girl, and ends off as a slightly less naive positive girl. Nobody properly challenges her worldview or mindset. Nothing ultimately gets her down for the count except for comedic moments about boats and ladders. Woo! And her dad dying. There was one moment in the second half I really genuinely connected with Wook Lamont, and that's when Zoral Ja dies, and she got upset about CJ's complete disregard for his direct familial connection to their father. Of course, this got interrupted by us immediately having to hold Wook's hand as she told her brother about the events that just happened, instead of just having a fade to black like every other instance in this game. There's moments where the character shines, but they're constantly interrupted by her being a wacky wahoo peace-loving lion lady who likes tacos and peace and her papa's peace and happiness and yada yada yada. It doesn't help that objectively, Wook is the character with the most interactions and voiced lines, which is great if you like her. Or don't mind pretty much every conversation being the same thing over and over while Alice and Alphino are there in the background going, ah yes, light bulbs. An invention that uses electricity to spark a glowing light that lights up a room. Ah yes, I remember when our father introduced light bulbs to the household. Characters like Kryle get absolutely overshadowed by Wook Lamont's excellent adventure, and get backloaded into the third arc of the story. Kryle's entire reason for being in Tyrol, for the first place, is ignored for the first 8 levels of the story. with all of it basically being a repeated loop of getting into a zone, finishing the story there and going, grandfather? No. Okay, thank you. And Krile was advertised as a main character, and so was Erenville, and he doesn't even get to do anything. Feels as if they wanted to tell like 3 different stories and merge them together. They wanted to explore Krile and Galuf. They wanted to go to the New World, and they wanted you to have a fun summer vacation after reality-ending threats. But it feels like an entirely mismanaged story that has an insane 180 from wacky fun in the sun, low stakes, to another world-ending threat. If you don't like Woklamat, you're shit out of luck because the writers want you to like Woklamat, and everybody in this story facilitates this. I don't care that the Warrior of Light doesn't lock in until the second half. It's fine. We're a literal walking WMD. We could have made quick work out of the entire Rite of Succession, and that's not the point. I'm fine with how the Warrior of Light took a backseat. But it doesn't change the fact that the devs really want you to like Woklamat, and if you don't, the entire story kind of falls flat because you're basically being a handler to an Oomphy that just stumbles her way through 2 continents because their dad asked you really nicely. And unless you're really into 20-year-old Oomphys, you're not gonna like it. Fuck, I yapped a lot about the story. Like, man, who let little bro in the kitchen, am I right? A lot of it was bullshit, but I still really enjoyed the story for what it was. It's just a shame that after the wombo combo of Shadowbringers and Endwalker, they repeated the same mistakes of A Realm Reborn and couldn't even stick to a low-stakes summer adventure. It didn't help that the patch story of Endwalker was kinda hit or miss, which, like I mentioned in my last video, I enjoyed! It wasn't anything special, but it also wasn't anything offensive. What else is there to talk about? The music is once again bumping. Everything from jazz to synth to rock to penis music is here, and I'm all for it. My only dislike track is the weird ending theme, especially because this is the first expansion since Stormblood where Amanda Shen isn't singing the ending theme, and really, it's unfair to compare the new track Smile to the duo of songs that are Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Flow. Like, you have 2 peak songs, it was doomed to fail. I don't make the rules, that's just how it goes, you know? Like, hey, uncommon Soken L. I respect the attempt to branch out and try new genres and stuff, but it is what it is. But hey, it was immediately made up for in Arcadian, where compared to Pandemonium Tier 1 in Endwalker, we only got 2 specific tracks, one of which was an amazing vocal theme. But here we got like 4 tracks for 4 floors, and like 2 of them are vocal tracks, and they're both good, and I love my new idol queen, Honey Bee Lovely. I admit that I'm always biased towards vocal tracks. That's just the type of goofy motherfucker I am. I always prefer a vocal track over something orchestral. All in all, Dawntrail is a mixed bag. There's a lot to like, there's some stuff to dislike, and there's a whole bunch I feel indifferent about. I give it a soft 7 out of 10. I can only hope they keep up with the patch content and don't revert back to Endwalker's design philosophy. I don't want to have another snooze cruise. Thank you very much. Oh wait, did I forget to mention jobs? See you next month for my video about Summoner.